COINTELPRO this program is established, and most people who do know about COINTELPRO think about the efforts against Fred Hampton and the Black Panther Party, things I've written about. But the almost 60% of the operations are targeted against the CPUSA, including especially, their top leadership and such. And there's some high comedy there, and there's just some appalling stuff. The most appalling thing I came across was the case of this Philadelphia communist, Aaron Leonard, who was a communist. He was a closeted gay man. I think around 65, 66, he was in a tea room in Philly, which was I don't know if the term is still used, but it was a gay hookup place in a park. He's arrested, in a sting operation. The FBI gets wind of it and makes sure it's in the paper. So it's in the Philadelphia Inquirer, I believe, the next day. And Libson's, there with his family reading this, and he's like, oh, shit, my life is over. In 66 to be outed as gay is kind of a big deal. So he enacts a plan to kill himself, which fortunately isn't successful. But the FBI basically does an after report saying, he's kicked out of the party's humiliated, it's all good, this is a good COINTELPRO. Mm-hmm. They don't care if people die, and, probably some of them are happy.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo with co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson, socialist and community college math professor Michael Hoffman, and socialist Kenny Cepeda. We're online at whatsleft.podcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode where we found this episode. We have merch as well. If you fancy a shirt, contact us through our site at whatsleftpodcast.com. Thank you. I'll turn it over to you, Andy.
Yeah. Well, today's episode is going to, again, actually be about my Uncle Aaron. I didn't necessarily think there would be another episode about him. We did one in March of last year when my uncle passed. Michael, had you done any episodes with us at that point or no?
No, but I watched it.
Okay. At the time or later?
Later.
Okay.
Just recently.
Yeah. He was an important person in my life, not just as my uncle, but as a person who connected me, many ways reconnected me back to my family, and it kind of connected me to sort of my communist, Bolshevik, revolutionary roots that I guess my family has been involved in some way for generations. And my uncle was probably the best biographer of that. And at one point I had hoped to kind of like just have a tape recorder on him. His memory is way better than mine in terms of all the things that had happened in our family on my father's side. So I didn't really expect to revisit him, but about, at least on What's Left. But about 2 weeks ago, Bo, who's been on our show, I believe, right? Bo, I think, has been on What's Left, and as a listener, sent me the thing you heard in the beginning, like the opener, which was a interview of a guy named Aaron Leonard, who wrote a book called Menace of Our Time, The Long War Against American Communism. And one of the stories he talks about is of my uncle. But it was a story about my uncle that while I'm familiar with it, I had never heard of it talked about in terms of COINTELPRO. It's not that my uncle didn't think that he was being watched by the government in the 60s. If you were a communist, everyone kind of was worried about that. And I found out later when I talked with his daughter and son, because in finding out about this man, Aaron Leonard, writing about my uncle, I reached out to him and then reached out to my uncle's daughter and son, and they both mentioned that some of the people he talks about from the Communist Party that they knew, they were people who would come over and hang out with my uncle and were friends. People I would say who later betrayed him. And I'll talk about what I think the nature of that betrayal is. But he did hear like clicks on his phone, things like that gave him indication that he was being wiretapped, right? Something that now every one of us is potentially in that kind of thing. But before, you had to go in and physically put something on somebody's phone to tap their phone, and you would hear little clicks. And if you've called into a prison before, been called from prison, you might hear those clicks as well. Well, he had been involved in the civil rights movement, in the early civil rights movement, and then at work he was a machinist, and worked in the union, worked as a union member, and I think had a pretty prominent role both he was well known in his job and also becoming a leading member in the Communist Party, by virtue of both his work in the building civil rights movement, and as a communist at the workplace. So he had been aware of being potentially like followed, or the government getting involved with him. But at no time when I heard about this story, and the story that is cited by Aaron Leonard is documented here. The story about him getting outed by the FBI as part of a COINTEL operation. Here's when I first, not when I first heard about it, but when I heard about it from my uncle. The way that Aaron Leonard would have heard about it was through this story that interview done with my uncle in the Philadelphia Gay News in 2013. And when he talks about the event of basically being charged under sodomy laws in Philadelphia, the interviewer asked, "When did you come out?" And he goes, "I got straight married when I was 23 and had 2 children. Then in 1966, I was arrested in a tea room in Hunting Park. I didn't do any time behind it, but it completely changed my life." And this is true. Like, this was a major scandal for him. And I remember hearing about it later, and what a big deal it was that he had been almost arrested for this stuff. The ordinance I was charged with has since been taken off the books, but at the time I was charged and tried. So the police had a park guard officer. They took me and kept me overnight. I knew that if it became public that I wouldn't be able to face anyone, family, friends, coworkers. I made a vow to myself that I would take my life if anyone found out. That was another component. There was so much going on at the time, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and so forth. I found myself, like a lot of us, joining the party. A year later, when I had the arrest, I pleaded nolo contendere. I did not wish to contend on a Friday. The next day, Saturday, I woke up and got ready for work, and I looked at the paper that morning. There was a small article saying, "Local Red arrested." I had a suicide plan ready just in case it came out. So I thought, okay, this is it. I carried out the plan. I wasn't going to do anything at my house where my family would find me. So I rented a room at the Arch Street YMCA. I packed some of the crystal stuff you can clean toilets with and some tin foil. And I swallowed that and laid down and waited for something to happen. Nothing happened. In the interim, I'd called a friend of mine. While I was waiting for something to happen with the poison, I got up and sat on the window ledge. The room was on the 5th floor. As I realized the poison wasn't working, I looked down and thought maybe I should just lean forward and let go. Before I could do anything, my friend showed up, knocking on the door. It saved my life. He called some people, including a lawyer who called my job, and talked to them. They said they had no problem with me coming back to work despite the arrest. From then on, I became known as the Gay Red, and people came to respect me to the point that I was elected union shop steward and then chief. People accepted me for who I was and how I presented myself. When the factory eventually closed down, it was on Saturday, and that's Monday I had a new job, as I was always accepted and respected. And so, like, to find out that, that a big reason that this was revealed are documents, are the fact that my uncle, who I do not believe he was aware that he was part of COINTELPRO, like that he was being investigated by them or used by them. And these documents that are in Aaron Leonard's book were just really fascinating to me. This stuff talks about publicity over. This is one of their documents from the FBI COINTELPRO. Publicity over arrest on a sodomy charge should neutralize Libsyn with the party and embarrass the party generally. And then they said, and then there's some redacted stuff. Who has been this person who has been used quite successfully in the counterintelligence program and has always protected the Bureau's interest. The Philadelphia Inquirer already has public source data identifying Libsyn as a CP member. So basically, this is the beginning of the FBI saying, we heard about this guy who has been arrested for sodomy laws. We can use somebody that we know in the Inquirer to make sure this gets published. All right, which then leaves my uncle to maybe almost kill himself. And then we're going to call the party. And this is another document. It says counterintelligence program. In January 1967, James Dolson, he's like the head of the Communist Party that would have known my uncle. James Dolson, Communist Party leader in Philadelphia, was informed by the FBI through an anonymous telephone call of current status and trial date concerning Aaron Libsyn, a CP member arrested for sodomy. This was a continuation of a previous anonymous information provided Dolson in November 1966 about Libsyn's arrest. So the FBI is calling Communist Party regularly, like telling them about a member of theirs, basically saying, "Oh, this guy was bad, and now it's out in the news," and da 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 da. So, and again, they're calling the Communist Party in November. It doesn't get out into the news, I think, until January. After Libsyn entered a guilty plea in February 1967. The fact was published in February. Okay, so and maybe it was not until February. Was published in a newspaper. So once he does a guilty plea, they publish in the newspaper in February. Daniel Rubin, National Organization Secretary, stated Libsyn was dropped from the CP. So I had a mix of just such an array of feelings. First off, it was when I heard this. The COINTELPRO program is so famous from that time. It's kind of shocking to me that I never really thought that the same program that was used to go after the Black Panther Party and other activists would have been obviously used here in this way. And I'm not sure I don't think my uncle knew the level of detail that Aaron Leonard has researched, because he certainly never talked about himself as a victim of COINTELPRO. But to see that my uncle was, well, one, it just shows how nasty the state is, that it will destroy anyone. And they didn't care whether he killed himself. They were just trying to hurt the party. They were going to go after him, and they were going to hurt the party doing this. What happens to his life? Who cares? But that is so. Obviously, there's so many lives been destroyed by the capitalist state in other countries, and not just our own. But the fact that it was my uncle, and it's kind of personal to see his name listed on the program, it just brings it home that this is just the nature of the state, that it's inhuman. And so that part is it resonates with me. It resonates with the fact that it doesn't matter if you've dedicated 20 years of your life to your school. Fuck you, get out. You won't take the shot. Bye. You won't give us your information. Bye. They don't care. But I think the other part that's really bothers me is the fact that my uncle, and like me, I feel it was in some ways trapped almost like in a pincer between the institutions that we know hate him, which would be the state, the media that's connected to the FBI or the CIA, and institutions which were supposed to be on his side, the Communist Party, that were supposed to be there to, as he's, help the working class, liberate the working class. And instead, and partly it has to do with the positions on homosexuality that the Communist Party had at the time, which I think have meaning for us today. And I want to talk about what those bad positions then on homosexuality mean for people fighting for liberation today, when I think of the transgender movement. when I see how readily the Communist Party was prepared to abandon him, and that's just not something that happens in 1966 or 67, that again projects into the future. I can go in 2010 in my experience in the ISO, but I can go to 2020 with my experience of outside of the ISO with other comrades who, when we find ourselves on some other line around this COVID stuff, it's like, bye, you know, there's something, both disheartening but revelatory in it. And I felt like I wanted to read and talk about what is going on. There's the state, and then there's the fight against the state. And I feel like almost the more interesting part is what is so broken in the fight against the state and the fight for working class liberation that leads revolutionaries to so readily abandon each other at their time of greatest need. And I do think there's something in, like, I'll show you later some stuff that I'm like, okay, I think there's something here that gives me clues as to what is so broken in our project. Because this kind of tale is told over and over and over and over again, not just in the Communist Party. You can see it in the Maoist movement, in the Trotskyist movement, and I believe even in the anarchist movement. I think it's in all. It seems to be in all revolutionary movements a knee-jerk abandonment of its comrades at the time of greatest need, and I think there's something to be figured out there, and I think there's an orientation problem. So these were the things that were coming up for me that I wanted to talk about, but I'll get into those more later. I just wanted to say that I was really grateful for Aaron Leonard getting this information, and I ended up talking with him. He's going to come on an interview on our show when he comes back in Thanksgiving. So he said, "Yeah, let's do that." And I don't necessarily mean, I know that Michael, you got this book. We can talk apart about this, but I think we're going to talk more about it when he joins us. But I'm proud of my uncle, and I appreciate him kind of coming back and teaching me more lessons about the nature of the world and the nature of the fight back for changing this world. And I feel like there's a lesson he's trying to teach me in this experience. He knew he was under surveillance, but I don't think he ever knew that he was so deeply entrenched in the COINTEL program, like in terms of their looking at him. And that, I'm glad I have that information now.
I guess your uncle's story, reminds me, right, like of the potential cost, or the real cost of standing up to power, right? Like trying to speak your truth. That you may not be a prominent person, right? Like Malcolm X and MLK. But if you are useful, right, for a purpose, like in his case, to throw some chaos right into the internal workings of this organization, then you'll be useful, right? Like, so and I think that reminds me, right, because we are saying some stuff here that could potentially be used against us someday. I've always I've spoken in this show with that awareness, and at the same time, I know there is some naivete on my part because I don't know the full extent, right? Like it's
Yep.
it's easy to say, right? Like I'm a revolutionary or this and that, until you actually face the consequences, right? And so, um, but it's just again a reminder of how vulnerable we are and remember, right? This is a time where there was targeted surveillance, and now we have surveillance everywhere. I feel sometimes we don't realize, right, like how much for any device that we have connected to the internet is surveilling us, right? And the information may not be sorted through yet, but it's living somewhere, right? In with the advancements in technology, it could be sorted in a better way and target people at a moment of the need of the powerful. And so and again, your uncle's story reminds me of possible consequences for each of us, right? In trying to, in try, and for us to try to do this, and then I guess we'll maybe later get into why, for example, I do this. Because there was a conversation, right, an email conversation with some of our comrades regarding as to how do we live a life, right? How if we don't see revolution happening, then what do we do, right? And I think for me, I haven't shared my answer in that. I might try to do it here at some point, but I think it's like um, it also shows, right, that your uncle, despite having gone through that very traumatic, intense moment where he was at the precipice, right, and then coming back and continuing to do, and I think at that point he must have had some awareness, real awareness, right, of the consequences, and he didn't back down, right, like he still went forward and did what he did, and so that also shows another part, right, like another reminder that. Um, that this is not a fun thing to do, right? This is we're not doing this just for fun or for credits or for money. None of us are getting paid to do this shit. Like, and yet here we are putting something that could out there in the world, in the digital world, that it will become part of our digital file.
I guess I could go next. I just, I appreciate you sending me this, sending us this, Andy. I didn't even know what a tea room is until I had to look it up. Tea room is a clandestine underground place where people met, men, and I'm identified as someone that is on that LGBT spectrum. I have said that previously here on What's Left, and I forget how much it used to be. You could not be out, I mean, I've been out to my mother, my parents. I don't think I even did officially came out. So, I mean, I just told them, yeah, I'm with this person. And since I was 15 in my teens, and it wasn't a big deal. For my mother, it was just sort of like, my religion, But, it's for my father, he just didn't care at all. And I just don't know what it was like for people back at that time to reveal like something like that to their family, to the point where they could potentially die by suicide. I mean, I could never fathom that. That's not on my list of reasons why I would die by suicide. I think I'd die by suicide if I was caught by the government and they tortured me, I think, but that is a psychological torture that is definitely present for many people at that time. So to meet at clandestine places and to also carry out your political activities so that you're able to do some good in the world. And, I think about Oscar Wilde, the writer and playwright. He was also incarcerated. And so, well, I didn't say Aaron Lipson was not incarcerated. He was
right. He never
but he was charged.
No contest, but his trial was in public through the Philadelphia Inquirer in some ways, right? Like it was the public exposure to his party and to his community that he was a criminal by virtue of sodomy laws.
Mm-hmm. So I guess just this story, and I downloaded the pieces that you sent, and I was looking over them, and it's just so real looking at redacted information and seeing how this is actually a true person. This is real. This is connected to you, and by virtue of that, you're connected to us, and so it's like affecting all of us, and it keeps us thinking about how this stuff could really happen at any point. And when Kenny and I were talking over the week, and I said, "What do you think we should be doing this week?" and he said, "Well, I think we should talk about my own fears in the context of when Andy's going to talk about his uncle, Aaron Lipson, because I have fears." And I've also been thinking about a lot of the rhetoric and the threats of the U.S. government deporting folks or threatening people because they're dissidents, and so those things scare me. I'm even afraid. I'm supposed to be traveling to California sometime soon, and I'm afraid of what I have on my phone. I don't think I have anything that could be compromising, but not like pictures or videos. But what about my social media feed? Is it saying something that I probably regret from the past? I've said a few things in debate and combat with Jacob that I don't know, and I'll say it here because it's already online. I can't decide what the public will do if they want to take a government in a public square and decide what to do with them. I mean, I thought just even saying those words make me afraid. Like, is that a threat towards capitalists? Is that something I've said it here? Or even saying that I support people's right to bear arms, and if that means they have to protect themselves by any which means necessary, then whatever. Like, those things, are those good things going to be used against me? I said it in different ways in other episodes. So it brings us back to the reality, to reality check.
I read the whole chapter that's in the book, and the chapter is called Hounded. And actually it starts with the way that the FBI was very politically savvy in exploiting the Sino-Soviet split to cause internal strife within the Communist Party, to the extent where they even invented some Maoist groups. I mean, this is sort of when the Sino-Soviet split leads to a split in the CP leadership, and this is kind of when U.S. Maoism starts developing a separate identity, very distinct from the CP. And so what I see, or what I felt, was actually reading that chapter, including the part, with your uncle. I mean, really made me feel a sense of, oh my God, they are way more sophisticated than I think I ever gave them credit for. And then it made me question, all this strife within the left, how much of it is literally just stoked.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Right. And so I went and looked up. I'm like, okay, so the FBI literally, and this is just one of the things that, I mean, it's interesting looking at it. The book is interesting because he only knows because there was a description within a specific personnel file of this project that basically an FBI agent created a fake Maoist organization, essentially to cause more splits with the CP. And I went and read it, and it's exactly like all the Maoist stuff I read. I mean, I wouldn't be able to tell if this was like a Maoist, today, one of the MIM people. The things that they were saying sound exactly like arguments that I assumed really, were from well-meaning people, right? I felt like that scene of the decline of the CP, and then the split with Russia and China, and then the FBI seizing on that to even further just destroy the left organization, combined with the fact that this is all in a situation where both the Russian Communist Party and the Chinese Communist Party had basically abandoned and criminalized homosexuality, right? So, your closeted gay uncle was organizing in a communist group that actually officially thought he was, a bourgeois deviation, right? So it just brought back this sense to me of the high point of our movement. The stuff we're talking about is so, I mean, there is newness in it. And I believe in keeping this kind of analysis alive, which is why I'm here. But it just, people have gotten way farther, and the state has been way more sophisticated at breaking us up. And that's even before everything was digitized, right? So it raises this question to me, like, how does this internal state apparatus look now? It seems like you don't need as many people because, like if you think about the process through which someone recognized that Aaron Libson was on a police report, someone connected to the FBI had to know that that name was on also a list of Communist Party members, and then send a memo around to say, hey, put this in the news, which is what happened. Like that level of attention to detail, watching things and responding to things as they happen. This was, what is it, 1966, before the internet. Partially, I feel a little bit of hope in that, maybe they got dumber just like everybody else after everything is, but I'm also like, now all those associations can happen instantaneously, automatically. But yeah, I just felt like we're so fucked. I just felt like, oh, right. Even to the point where it's like, okay, I'm back to agreeing with you that there's going to have to be a total freaking world war and almost like complete destruction of everything. And then the left is going to have to emerge out of whatever class, or sorry, not the left, but like an actual working class movement is going to have to emerge out of the rubble, because the state is so much more powerful than any kind of organizational practice I've ever even read about right now, other than things like in the Russian Revolution, but even then the state was so much weaker. I don't know.
Well, I think that's a launching point, because I think there is the discussion of individually, how do we deal with the fears that come up when we think about how penetrated this system is, and how much we are already giving our information, how each of us is creating our own file now. It's not kept in a cabinet. And I think the point you're making, Michael, of there was a guy who had Aaron Libson in his file, and he comes up on a police blotter. That information gets to them. Then they know we've got to call our Philadelphia Inquirer person, but they're going to wait for a moment. They're going to wait till he actually contends, till he makes a contention of guilty, or no contending. And then they're going to go ahead and release it to the Philadelphia Inquirer. Prior to that, they're talking to the CP party people about, hey, you got this guy, basically trying to
snitch on him.
Yeah, but use the divisions that already exist in the movement against it. And so for me, that's the biggest piece. And I do want people, let's talk about people's fears, because they're there for me too. And I don't just think about what we're actually putting out, but I think about the program that WikiLeaks talked about, Vault 7, that was what they did, which is basically the CIA's thing of planting information anywhere they want to. So you can not do anything, but they can create anything they want about you here now at this point. That's what Vault 7 really was about, which I thought was one of the most meaningful reveals that WikiLeaks had done on the government. So it is that, and we've talked about this before, and I think it came up big time when Kenny, you were mentioning how we ourselves had fallen into the trap of division that came up over COVID, and that we have to really think twice about how much we want to let ourselves go down that road, and do as much as we can to not allow the divisions that are being forced to force us into, if we can resist it, how do we maintain a connection to people who even at some point are kind of questioning us or even castigating us? because I do think that's the lesson for this, is like they will create splits or take advantage of any split possible within the working class movement. And this is where, like, the stuff about the CP is so, like, I want to show you some things that gets to the stuff that Michael's talking about, their position about homosexuality. But for me, this is not just about homosexuality. It's about showing that any political weakness will be exposed. We've talked about it in terms of immigration and why the no borders position is so important. I think we can also talk about it in all sorts of ways, of like the left and the right is actually being a kind of divide that's being exploited. But to put workers in red bins or blue bins so that they're not in a common bin of being bowled into a revolutionary bin. Which is where we want to go. And so I'm going to share my screen again and share. So while this position is not exactly the same that the CP held at the time, this is written in 1975 by another. It's a CP connected group. Position paper of the Revolutionary Union on Homosexuality and Gay Liberation. And here are a few things they say within it. Homosexuality is an individual response to male supremacy and male chauvinism. It is a response which turns its back to the struggle between men and women. I'll skip from there. It is important to deal concretely with homosexual relationships as they exist in our society today. Many people, especially women, have become homosexuals as a matter of choice, usually after some involvement in the women's movement. There are women who said they couldn't or wouldn't deal with men in their personal relationships. Such a choice is clearly individualist. It says, I have the right to relate the way I want to. I can do what I want with my body. There are many people who become homosexual at inclination or for 1,000 other reasons, which we can call more or less unconscious. Objectively, however, there are no real differences between the two cases, although the subjective attitudes of the people involved might be different. In both cases, people are in relationships which necessarily place them outside the mainstream of our society and thus puts enormous strains upon the relationships, strains over and above those which exist in heterosexual relationships, which are by no means ideal. They go on. Based on the above considerations, we see that homosexuals are forced to live on the periphery of society insofar as their relationships are subject to public abuse, and therefore such relationships can be only individual solutions to the contradictions of imperialism, which we were talking about the war at that time, much in the same way as going to live in a commune is an individual response to alienation, or in the same way as embracing a religion is an individual solution. Because people who make such choices are ostracized is unfortunate, but again, it is not a sign. But again, it is not a sign of being progressive. The thing that makes it the things that make it individual and not progressive is not that it is done alone, but that it does not engage masses of people in struggle. It doesn't organize or set a basis for organizing masses of people to fight around their needs. In imposing an individual solution to the contradiction of monopoly capitalism, homosexuality is an ideology of the petty bourgeoisie and must be clearly distinguished from proletarian ideology, the ideology of the working class. The ideology of the working class is based on the knowledge that the only way to resolve contradictions of capitalism is through mass struggle with each other and against our common oppressors. Just going to go on to one more part. To say that homosexuality is stamped with the brand of petty bourgeoisie should not imply that gay people cannot be and aren't strong fighters against imperialism. But we should be clear that it is not the homosexuality of gay people which makes them an anti-imperialist fighters. While gay people, they go on in the next paragraph, while gay people can be anti-imperialists, we feel they cannot be communists. To be a communist, we must accept and welcome struggle in all facets of our lives, personal as well as political. And as communists, we have chosen to put class struggle and the revolutionary movement of the working class and all oppressed people in the forefront of our lives. It is a serious task. Quote, a revolution is not a dinner party or writing an essay or painting a picture. Because homosexual relationships require so much time, we have found that homosexuals have an extremely difficult time meeting the strenuous requirements of a communist organization. And they have often put unnecessary burdens on their comrades. All right, that's a long quote. But, all right.
What the fuck is going on with those people?
Well,
it's like the FBI wrote it. It's like the FBI fucking wrote it.
So here,
it must be a lot of time What are gay people doing the whole time? Fucking or what? Shit. They have other things to do in their lives besides fucking. I know for sure. Trying to
So
survive out here. I'm not always fucking.
the
Shit.
the thing,
I'm sorry, and
yeah, no, no, no. Go
me
ahead.
directly.
You, Eduardo, take a moment and go ahead and say
Does
what.
your relationship take a long time? That's not allowing you to carry out your activities, Mr. Lipson. What about you, Kenny? Is your family taking a lot of your time? It's strenuous. It's just strenuous. Relationships. You may not be up to the task, Kenny and Andy Lipson. Your heterosexuality is too much. What is going on?
All right.
Oh my
No,
God.
Eduardo, tell me when you're done because I think it's important. You go ahead and say what you're going to say.
No, I'm just like, oh my God. Just like, I'm sorry, it's just the stupidity of what happens in people's minds. It's like my brother, he is saying to me, I'm sorry, I'm just going to take a moment. He said to me, well, homosexuality is not natural, and it should be taught in middle school. I'm like, I was taught heterosexuality all the time in elementary school. I saw a bunch of films, kissing and boys and girls in films and stuff. Anyhow, I guess what I'm trying to say is the stupidity of what is conceived of what, it's just like, it's not my first identity, which is why I don't even go to Pride March and things like that. It's X. Like, I don't concentrate too much on this identity. I have other identities to concentrate on, namely my identity of trying to, my, I guess, anarchist identity, my political identity. These are more important to me than my sexual orientation identity is beyond.
Maybe
I don't have to do anything with it.
maybe you're not being gay enough. But that's
Maybe. Maybe I need to put some brillitos, some sparkles. Anyhow, all right.
It's funny though because this crazy stuff. There's so many things wrong with it, right? Like we can go through. Like actually, most gay people were in the closet because they were oppressed by capitalist gender norms, right? And there's a whole actual section of Marxist analysis that actually analyzes capitalist gender norms, right? So there's just been like this whole section of Marxist theory and Marxist tradition that's been thrown out the window. But also, this is basically because internally, the Soviet Union needed to up the birth rate because essentially they were trying to compete with the West in developing their own state capitalism, right? And this is where like the tradition we come from, I feel like is stronger on this point because that wasn't necessarily written by the FBI. Like you can go and read the actual Soviet documents that essentially in 1933 they recriminalized, right? They recriminalized homosexuality because it had been decriminalized in the original Russian Revolution. So there's just so much backwardness in it, but you really see like the decline of a movement, like a movement sort of turning basically much more towards nationalism and abandoning parts of sort of universal class solidarity coincides perfectly with the demands of the capitalist state to internally crack it up, to break it up. So yeah, it's crazy. It's just so damaging.
So I first off, I actually asked Brandy to read some of these sections just kind of to see how it would go for her because she's not familiar, as me and Michael are very familiar with the way arguments are made in revolutionary organizations and how they're structured a particular way. This document, while it says what I would describe as some absurd things about homosexuality, is very much in the line with the kind of arguments we're familiar with to justify anything. To justify anything. And it's rooted not in nationalism. It's not rooted it's rooted in my opinion, it's rooted in what is necessary for the class struggle? What is necessary for what we need to make a revolution? That's how they end with. How do we make a revolution? How do we do class struggle? How do we dedicate ourselves to this thing so we can be the why? Yes, gays can be anti-imperialist, but they can't be communists because communists are for working class struggle. Communists are for working class revolution, and these people are on an individual trajectory. And look, this has been said so many times. Stalinists there, Maoists there, anarchists there, Democrats there, Republicans there. Look, immigrants there, over and over and over. Like
don't forget the Trots.
Trotsky is there, right? Yes. And so I want to what I want to highlight in it is not the elements that are most absurd, but the elements that I find so common in the way we talk about the project. And that you can use anything to lead. Now, in my opinion, this position, it definitely could have been written by the FBI, but maybe I don't know if it was, because like you're saying, like Michael, we could just as easily. I don't know where the FBI ends and revolutionary parties begin. I don't know the answer to that. But the position I think they're taking is it's a fucking pain in the ass to have people who are going to be hounded by the state in our party. It's going to be a weight on our party. We're already getting hounded enough, so we don't need to be fucking dealing with these people who are just going to make it that much harder on us. Like that. That's honestly, that's how I think this comes out. It's just justified on the basis and actual homophobia, actual, like the difference they make between women, well, you can understand more than men. I do believe actual discomfort with homosexuality connected to a cowardice and not wanting to deal with the state and not willing to deal with the consequences of what solidarity actually means has allowed them to take this position that to my wife actually makes some sense, because communists know how to write shit and they know how to write things that make sense to people. Like they can create an argument that has the basis of, because there's some things in here that strike as true. And my sampling test is my wife, who has never looked at any of this stuff. And I said, and she has her own background in going different ways sexually. So I was like, how does she look at this? Is she going to read this and be like, what the fuck are these people talking about? And she was like, actually, Andy, I can see where they're getting at some of this stuff. She didn't get to the final point of like, but that's how it works. It's like, yeah, this makes some sense. Therefore, abandon anyone you need to for the cause of revolution and for the cause of the possibility for the cause of working class struggle. To me, that's what's broken. To me, that's when I look at those lines and I go, there's something wrong there. Because of course I believe in working class struggle, and of course I believe in revolution, but somehow they've been able to abstract the actual root of the idea that this is built on the idea of human connection, on solidarity with each other against an enemy. There's something that's like that there. I haven't figured it out yet, but there's something that is missing, that has been missing in all the things I read in the ISO, that is missing in this thing that was written in 1975, that allows us to abandon each other at the time of greatest need in the name of fighting for something bigger, while we abandon the very people who are going to be part of that. To me, if we can't solve that, then forget it, in my opinion, because it has been proven through my uncle, through our own experience, time and time again. It has been proven that if we abandon, it is like the most important slogan: an injury to one is an injury to all. If we can't follow that slogan, then I don't think we can't get there. And so I'll just say that the modern day lesson for me in this one, because I do believe the situation for people who identify as gay, whether they even be a man or woman, is not nearly as perilous as it was in the 60s. But I do believe that what's happened in the transgender movement and what's happened among a section of freedom folks, and even for Jessica's position, she's on our show, which is like, no, this is against women. And, I get it where you're coming from. But I believe that those folks who see in the transgender movement the specter of transhumanism and being used to use this position to like impose and bring in a foreign enemy viewpoint, which is the transhumanist viewpoint, see them as sort of like the Trojan horse for bringing that in. I believe it's literally the same, falling for the same problem that you can see in the 70s or 60s that gay people were, that you could see how that's taken advantage of. And in fact, I believe that's actually what happened to an ally of ours, Alison McDowell. I believe that her association with the transgender movement by virtue of having somebody in her family identifies that, and people saying she's actually putting up with that. She's actually doing, people that she had educated about what's going on in the fourth industrial revolution came back and hounded her when they found out, oh, wait a second, you have a person in your family who does that? Maybe you don't take a position strong enough against transgender movement. So this is not new, and it exists today. And in fact, the dude who did it the dude who made the big case about it, he has connections to like the military, right? So this stuff still goes on. There is a time-tested thing, and I think when talking with Aaron Leonard, he was like, maybe the stuff isn't as active today as it was before. And I'm like, no, I didn't say it to him at the time, but I'm like, this shit is still alive and well. They have a playbook that they operate by, and they'll do it to. And what was also important is they will do it to the smallest figure if they just see that you're getting somewhere. They will take anything they can and pull a thread on it to try to weaken you. And that, I do believe that's happened to Allison. I do believe she was hounded by people. It was very hurtful to her. And I think it has ultimately led to her kind of taking more a position of like, I'm out, see ya, I don't agree with that, but I understand it. And she's herself has criticized us for our things and blah, blah, blah. But she is very much a person who has gotten me to see the world as it really is. And the same people who were helped by her and seeing the world as it is, they went after her when they found out that there was a transgender connection to this. So she must not really be against the fourth industrial revolution because transgender is transhumanist and that's coming in to like destroy our movement. No, the state's coming in to destroy your movement, and they're going to use any division they can use to like get you separated from each other. How about we learn how to actually back each other up? How about we learn how to support each other when we're under attack instead of attacking each other? Maybe we should learn that. And why has the communist movement not taught us how to do that? That's a question I would have. They talk about solidarity, but obviously, anyway, so I've gone on for a long time. It's just, those are the things I'm thinking about.
You touched on a bunch of things that I've been wrestling with, in terms of, again, this goes back to why I ask myself, why am I doing this, right? Like, let me start with the point that you made, that I agree with you that any intelligent person, right, can argue for anything and fucking convince people, right? Like Charlie Kirk, right? Like he was a fucking intelligent person, and he would trap people in these games, and he would come out, victorious in a dead end of fucking arguments that was kind of pointless, right? Like, because like I don't agree with the fundamental analysis that he had, whatever. But then Malcolm X, right? Like he argued, he was a magnificent debater, right? And he could fucking, show you how you were the devil, Michael, how you Lipson were the devil, right? Like, and then, in so on and so on, right? Like any intelligent person can argue for anything, right? And so I've been wrestling with the limits of rationality, right? Like that, I recently came across, maybe their algorithm fed it to me. They did feed it to me. This person that discusses philosophy in Spanish. She's a Mexican philosopher. The point is that she talked about Dante's Divine Comedy. I'll make it short. And the basic argument that she says is that, Dante is arguing that there are the levels, right? To get out of hell, you need reason. But you also need to get out of the purgatory. You need faith, and to reach heaven, you need love above everything else. Love, right? And so I've been wrestling with this, and also the idea of abandonment, right? She was also discussing in Frankenstein, right? That this monster was actually suffer abandonment from the beginning, from its creator, right? And in rejection and all this stuff, right? Like, that, and I've thought about me and how angry I've been, and how like I've pointed people at, fingers at people, like, or shut up when I'm angry, and then, again, but again, just keep that frame in mind, that, hell is reason, right? Like, you get out of hell with reason, but you don't go far with that, with just reason, right? You're gonna need some fucking faith, right? And then love. And so I've been wrestling with this idea of love, right? That there is, that it's probably the most important thing above anything else to me at this moment. Because personally, the way I answer that question that we've been wrestling with on that email thread, is that I do this because I love humans. I love people. I love nature. And I'm sorry I get emotional, but that's why I care, because I have empathy. And along the way, when I dealt with so much reason, I lost that empathy. I became hardened, full of hate, and in doing the same shit that we accuse other people. Sorry. That's my journey. But if we're not doing this for everyone, then fuck this. This is why I question this whole thing about the dictator. I get it. I get the concept. I get the idea. But if you're asking me to oppress other people, then fuck this, right? If you're asking me to force people to do something, then fuck this. Like, and so again, I can expect everyone to have my experience. Like, I come to my revolutionary views because, asking questions about the world, my dad's deportation, being an immigrant, the fucking, just growing up in a dictatorship and being taught how to fucking vote, all that bullshit. But again, in my search, I realized that sometimes the people that are not in these fucking debates know more than we do, or know at least something important that we don't, right? And this is why I keep coming back to my family, that even after I've taken my journey through going to Berkeley and thinking that I fucking know the world, and that I know how to rationalize, that I come across all this intellectual shit, that they were still there even though they didn't know all this shit. And my mother, like, I've had my issues with my mother, but the reason I admire my mother so much is because, despite lacking intellectual rigor, right, she was a true leader in the community. She didn't know this shit about homosexuality and stuff, but she showed up for people that were, I guess, transsexual in my community, right? The British people. She showed up for people who were thieves, who were sex workers, and just because she was moved by compassion, right? And so that's just what I want to throw in there, right? Like, why do we do this shit? Who are we fighting for? In Because otherwise we get stuck, I think, in one of those levels. And again, that's just a useful thing to think of, I think, because I don't want to be caught in just the realm of hell, like, just trying to live out of there with just rationality. There's other things that we have to foster, and that requires introspection too, right? And even showing up for people that we don't fucking understand, right? And may not agree with, right? But understanding that there is some humanity, some life there that we're trying to show up for. And so, yeah.
Eduardo or Michael?
There's a lot to unpack. I don't know if thank you, Kenny. I don't just say something, Michael.
One of the things that it makes me think of is You know, what is the practice of that love? You know, and I have a very specific political narrative that, you know, that so when I was saying that this is about nationalism, what I meant was that the goal, like the motivating goal of like real true human liberation, which to me was embodied organizationally in you know, elements of the Russian Revolution. Like they were like, you know, the fundamental communist idea of from each to each was born out in practice in solidarity of workers shutting down production together and then taking it over to take care of each other. But then, in order to defend the gains of the revolution in the state, they had to basically manipulate the politics of it to align with the, you know, the needs of the Russian state, and that had this impact of now we have to you know, we essentially have to clamp down because we're in competition with the capitalist states. I mean, and it plays out through the Civil War and stuff. But I mean, I guess what I'm saying is like, I think the genuine practices that regular people exhibit, like that regular people want to do, are on purpose interrupted, and some of that is from our own tradition, from the communist tradition, internalizing these ideas that are essentially like, well, you know what, we have to abandon this group or that group in order to preserve this little thing that we have, instead of seeing like we need to win the world, right? Instead of having like the absolute the goal of real human liberation in mind, you're walking back down to these, you know, to this sort of these compromise goals and pretending that that was the goal all along, right? Like I see there's this retreat and then lying about the retreats that leads to this kind of internal repression or internal abandonment. And I think about the way that the FBI can play on those ideas and turn people against each other, but they don't have to do all of it. Mm-hmm. You know, like to me, I'm like, I think people do it a lot now, all on their own. In fact, even just the design of social media, you know, so I have big questions. You know, I'm like, I have no idea how much they have to consciously stoke this stuff. And it may be just, you know, a little here and there, or it may be a lot, right? So like, but, you know, I think the core ideals of we do not think anybody's worth comes from whatever category they're from, or whatever, you know, however much wealth they own, right? Or however much profit they can produce. People's value comes from the fact that we can be in community with each other, right? And that's the kind of spirit out of which we see working class, you know, real working class struggle from below. And that's always been from that basic instinct of taking care of each other and taking care of people. And a lot of the other shit comes from like, well, you don't understand. We have to compromise here and compromise there. And us also not being able to practice the kind of organizing or even the kind of, you know, because we, even like in the battle against the state, and in this book, it raises the question of like, how do you deal with this in an organization? To me, you know, there's definitely some loss of memory along the way here, where, you know, what do you do when the state is coming after you like this? How can you prevent the FBI from sowing dissension? And what kind of politics really do that? I mean, there's this story where like Elizabeth Gurley Flynn writes a letter in the CP communist CP thing saying, we welcome everyone's criticism and everyone's debate. And the FBI is like, ooh, good, let's use that. And the other part of the story is like the CP people just being like completely oblivious that, an anonymous, I mean, it's harder to detect now, but like anytime a pamphlet is anonymous, anytime a group of people like appears and says things that, and you don't know any of the people in it and no one else knows any of the people in it, like those are red flags to be like, oh, actually, maybe this is the feds, right? But I mean, I just don't think we know, or like, not only has some of the practice of fighting the state in earnest been lost, but we also just don't even get to practice the basic things that would kind of inoculate our movements against that. And so I think this is the thing, like Andy is saying, this is deeper than just, the decline of the Soviet Union leading to this kind of politics, which is what I was always thinking. It's like the Russian Revolution didn't spread, and then they were fucked, and then so it kind of decayed, and then we got all these really shitty politics that the state that weakened us, and then the state was able to use that to smash us, and now there's basically no kind of organized memory of successful class struggle, no continuity between like when we actually won things and now. So and I guess to put it back at you, Kenny, is like, what does loving everyone look like right now? That's a tough question. What does it look like in practice? That's what I'm trying to figure out. And it looks like, to me, also looks like telling some people they're fucking wrong, and telling some people that they're, heading us towards slaughter, which is a difficult, I love you and you're acting like a cop. Or, it's easier said than done, right? I mean, there's a struggle of ideas and practice. And I don't know how, I feel like the movement at some point has to deeply learn the lessons of how the CP was repressed and know the kinds of things to actually counter that and prevent that from breaking things up and breaking people apart. And maybe it is a deeper thing that has to do with, the concept of revolution, and that we need a revolutionary organization. Maybe there's a fundamental thing. I think the anarchists would say that, right? It's like you're trying to build a state. But yeah, it's a hard question, and it's hard to know what to do about it in the absence of actual living struggle, people actually fighting.
I just think that I can't. I'm trying to define or find explore this idea of love, because I don't think we can just define it, right? Like we have to wrestle with it personally. For me, it's like, again, trying to see why, like, for example, what the hell is a conservative, trying to answer, like, not the political, but like, why would they defend life, right? Like, for example, like, it doesn't matter that we engage in these debates, and for example, I've changed some of my views when I became a parent. I would say I become more conservative, but I'm not going to go and support the state to impose shit on other people. That's between them and their God and their lives, and what I want is the freedom for people to have their own, live their lives. And so I guess my point is, like, it's just love leads to compassion, right? And try to understand the other side, because, like, I feel that I've talked about it, right? Like, we're so fucked, not because the state has the technology, not because the state has the shit, because we're actually buying into that shit and fighting each other, right? Like that is the obvious thing. Divide and conquer is the oldest fucking trick in the book, right? And how do we overcome that? And for me, it's not even trying to explain, like, I think I can give a decent like explanation of what I see happening, right, in the geopolitical and economical things and how these things are coming together and threatening everyone and why they need technology. But it's like I won't reach anybody if there is no love at the front of it, right? That is just I'm demagogue or someone dictating something or like there has to be something else mediating, right? Like in I at least in my life when I've provided I've reached most people when I've been on my best, right? Like in a genuine giving way, right? Like I'm also reading this other book. It's called the Service Berry, which also questions capitalism. It's very small, but it's also about like philosophy of nature and seeing things are as gifts versus commodities. And so again, I'm just exploring this idea of trying to rediscover and hold on to what it means to be human, because that's ultimately at the fight that we're fighting, right? Like that we're fighting against a system that is completely anti-life and anti-human, right? And it's taking a piece, taking us apart little by little, and we are dealing. Yes, we had the world. I do believe we're heading to world war, right? Like we are at the beginning stages. Things are obvious for me, but we're dealing with the rubble, right? Like of the history that we're dealing with that has led us to this place. So we already are dealing with destruction. And so again, if we're not, I think that for me it's like just exploring that, which I think is central to answering what the fuck is a human, right? Like love is a huge part of it. And so again, I don't have answers. It's just I'm just sharing my process. I'm sharing my journey that I will continue to engage in intellectual conversations, obviously, but I think there's another element that is being lacking on the left for, for a long time, where we disassociate, right, like parts of being human and just concentrate on, again, trying to get out of hell with just reason alone.
I am, I was thinking about what you were saying, Andy, regarding uh, uh, working class folk that are trans. I have said on previous episodes, and I'll still say it today, I identify as a gay man that has been with women, but some circles in very radical, uh, progressive LGBT circles, I remember being ousted because I have had heterosexual experiences that allow me to have access to privileges, as they'll say. And so I have been excluded from certain circles. That doesn't take away the fact that I've also experienced homophobia. I try to say that, but some LGBT circles are no. And so I also feel that this is happening with the trans movement as well. I wouldn't even say it's a movement. I just think people identify as trans. Personally, I think that there's a smaller population that identifies as trans, and that there is, historically, we've always had, like the Inuits, if you didn't have a firstborn son, your firstborn daughter took up the role of those tasks and married, another woman. They never named her as a trans man. She took up male responsibilities, and then she was just the man of his family household. At that time, those things are important, not necessarily because someone identifies as trans or just because she was to take up those responsibilities. So examples like that in history and in tribes and cultures, I think, have existed for a long time. Hijaras, Mushe, all these other um, cultural aspects of the trans identity. So I do think that there are people who identify as such, and they are part of the working class. And I just think that there's also this other area that Jessica has also opened our eyes to, which there are people who have fetishes, or people who are trying to drive us into the transhumanist movement. But there are still people, and also, just to Kenny's point, having had raised uh, a child, to an adolescent, I had also become conservative, and I get weary of social media influencing people's identities and messing with people's psychological well-being, and if they disorient them, and how much are we discussing things that can be too far in the fluidity space that I feel sometimes we don't allow kids to figure it out for themselves, that they get so influenced by social media. These are things that have come across my mind many times when I had the charge that I had, and that's why I didn't need to talk about my personal life with anybody. I just wanted um, my adolescent to figure things out on his own, not through my experience, but through his experience. And those are things that I've considered many times. So I've had changes in the way that I think, and sometimes those changes have also come in opposition to the progressive Democrat sort of way of thinking, especially when you're in the Bay Area, like in San Francisco. I have seen so much of it that way, different from how it is here in Mexico, where trans is different. People identify as trans, but they also realize that there's biological differences between men and women, and they don't make such a big deal over their identities. And also just the feeling that I'm not having to put that as my first identity, that I'm on the LGBT spectrum. I don't have to say that here. I don't feel that way. I just am and do my life. Why is this important? Because we're talking about Aaron Leonard, who himself is a gay man. And I actually don't even talk about this a lot. I don't talk about my struggles or the need for this. But the reason why I'm saying this is because you said that there might be areas where the government might see there's a crack in a movement and try to split. And we need to unify, and we need to see what we have in common. And I see that even myself with people who are Christians, and I'm an atheist. I see myself with people who are who believe that their sovereignty is in jeopardy, even though I don't think it is, because of illegal immigration. And that's the way they see it. I'm using their words, not mine. And they might feel like they have questions around, how do we organize with people who are different from me? The color of the skin, the language, their identity is completely different from mine. Their culture is different from mine. And so I feel threatened by that. And they might be in opposition to having more migration, which I get. But looking for the state is not an actual solution to try to curb that. And also just xenophobia in general, right? That's just natural. I think we're very innately drawn to people that look like us, are like us. And when we had the discussion some time ago with Jonathan about men's mental health, I know that there are men who feel uneasy about being grouped in with other gay men. They may not feel that they have those very same experiences. But when I see how the different people I have met in my life, whether they have still conservative views on homosexuality and have changed over time and getting to know me and my partner and have changed their way of thinking, when I have seen people also act differently from the way that they thought an atheist is, like I would judge them or make fun of their beliefs, which I don't. I attack the state and I attack the institution itself. I don't attack people's spiritual take on their religious activity. Then it's like you can build those bridges. And I always point out to the union between the Welsh miners in the UK back in the 80s and the LGBT groups that were organizing in London, because I was, in 2015, I was living in the UK to 2016, and I had this wonderful experience of meeting very many people that were part of that movement, that were in that time in the 80s. And I have a video clip I want to show that they talked about this. And Margaret Thatcher, a woman, by the way, this is why identity politics and work, was one of the most conservative, hard iron women that were discussed, that were oppressive. She was very conservative and wanted to destroy many of she wanted to get rid of the welfare system as well in the UK. Anyhow, she went after the Welsh miners, the coal miners. And I've said this many times with the LGBT folks, when united, a largely conservative group, and you could just see that the beauty of having worked together, people from opposing sides, you would not imagine them being together. So if I can just show a clip, if that's all right, that the words that were said give me inspiration for the future of how we can work together.
The lesbian and gays has been super duper, and I mean that sincerely. There's no other words I can explain it.
The group started off in July after Gay Pride so that one community could give solidarity to the other, right? It was really illogical. When you think about it, it's quite illogical to actually say, well, I'm gay and I'm into defending the gay community, but I don't care about anything else. It's ludicrous. It's important that if you're defending communities, that you also defend all communities and not just one. And that's one of the reasons, that's the main reason why I'm involved in it.
Yeah, but a lot of people will say, you know, if you're collecting that, why should we support the miners? Because the miners don't support us. I mean, what do you tell people who say that to you?
Well, I mean, what do you mean when you say the miners don't support us? The miners dig coal, which creates fuel, which actually makes electricity. People, I mean, would you go down and mine and work? I wouldn't like to go down and mine and work. One of the reasons I support miners a lot is because they go down and do it. I wouldn't do it.
All I'd like to say in conclusion is victory to the miners, victory to the lesbians and gays, victory to the old, victory to the young, victory to the sick, and victory to the working class. Thank you.
Since one of the things that lesbians and gays supporting the miners and the miners communities that have come into contact with them have learned is that perhaps firstly of the existence of each other's communities and of some of the common struggles between those communities, or in those communities, that it would be a great pity to see that dissolve. And so I think it's important that everybody remembers the lessons that they learned from looking at each other's lives and from how we deal with the problems that we have and how we fight back against the oppressions that we find, not just in the government, in the state, but also around us. After all, I mean, a lot of mining communities have found out what police harassment is for the first time perhaps, and things like that, which gay people have known about.
There are areas that we can find obviously flaws in, like for example, then they went on to support the Labour Party, which is like, oh my God, you go ahead, the Democrat Party, right, of the USA. But the thing is, from the very beginning, I mean, there are not images. I'm not going to go and search these images right now, but I'll include it in the clips. This isn't just little marches. These were fighting the police, by the way. I've seen scenes.
I was watching a policeman actually clubbing a picket about something awful. I told him a few choice words that he shouldn't be doing it. Another policeman ran up and told me I was nicked. And I said, I don't give a damn about you and no one else. So he arrested me, took me towards the police line, and as he was going I thought I'd make a little protest, and I put my arm up in a gesture and shouted, "Way!" And with that he hit me right on the head with a truncheon. And I didn't make no effort to do no harm to him or any other policeman.
Before I came back into the mining industry, I did 3 years in Ireland, and I'm ashamed of what happened out there when I was there. And believe me, it's bloody coming, because I can tell how the police are trained, that they're trained by army. The dogs what they have aren't always police dogs, they're war dogs, and you can tell by the way they're trained. They're not trained to, if they go for anybody, capture, down and guard. They're trained for to rip apart, and we've experienced it all, Graves, where the dogs were let loose and the war dogs, you know.
And what I seen that day is nothing. You can never call the police in this country, because they were running into the crowd with horses and batons about a yard long and thrashing out at anyone and everything that moved, regardless what you done. If you was only standing still, they would have hit you to the ground. And I was listening on telly, and the commentator was saying the police use their trenches liberally. Well, if he calls that liberally, he must have made the biggest understatement I've ever heard. on television is really biased towards the miners, and I feel really bitter about it because they are showing whenever a miner does a little bit of aggro, it doesn't show the full effect of the police against the miner. They got me on the floor, spread-eagled me, a copper on each arm, one on each leg, and they started to hit my arms and legs with a truncheon, methodically, until I had no power or grip left in my arms. Then they just proceeded to twist them straight up my back. I think he wanted to take it home for a souvenir. Now, why the police go in with such venom? They seem to enjoy inflicting pain and suffering on the working man. Why? Who tells them to go beat a picket's head? Who tells them to inflict pain, try to kill him? Because that's what they're doing. You stand there in the push and all you feel all of a sudden a fella outside, he'll collapse in a pile on the floor. What's up with you? He's just been kneed in the groin. I've seen police do it. I've no skin left on my shins, where they run the boots down your shin. But if you look at him the wrong way, you're nicked. I want to know who gives them the power to do this. Who tells them to beat me, a working man, with a stick? Who is it? I want to know.
And when the miners realized how much their bridge was important, they went and supported the LGBT back in London. And they even, the conservative group, religious groups doing this. And so, unfortunately, the Labour Party took up this opportunity to, as most parties do, to take over it and say, this is our fight. And that's the flaw there. But I want to just, bring and highlight the importance of what we're seeing also in Thacker Pass, Nevada, which we also interviewed a guest here, where you see cowboys and indigenous folk and environmentalists coming together. I mean, I think for me is constantly looking for that balance where I can find my struggle with working class people, even if we have our differences, and dealing with the ignorance that comes with it sometimes. I may feel uncomfortable alongside a Trump supporter that is saying awful things about people that look like me, and also understanding that we're both on this same fight together, and that through our relationship there might be something that we can try to work things out, where he understands who am I and I'm not that threat that he actually thinks I am. This is misplaced anger, and we're actually working hard for the very same thing. And that's why I don't want to demonize everyone from the 6th of January, because if we only united, how much would we be able to accomplish? And I actually admire people that went up to the Capitol. To think that is the most courageous thing to do. I wouldn't always agree with the way their ideals or their agenda is, but to go into a Capitol and to look for people who are actually committing murders across other lands, I think is something that's very brave. And we've discussed this as well with other groups, like the ones that we were discussing, the prison guards. Remember, Andy? So anyhow, I think there's something to look at constantly when we're discussing this, and it makes me think about where is our fight with other people that might not think the same as us. I'll leave it at that.
I'm glad you showed that video, because I think so the first thing I'll say is repeat what Kenny said, which is, I don't think I have any answers to some of these questions. I think what Kenny said he said the limits of rationality, not the pointlessness of rationality, the limits of it. And then I will also say possibly the limits of love. There are, I don't know if the love I'm talking about, when I hear the love that Kenny's talking about, how I hear it in terms of building unity within a movement, I don't know how that includes Benjamin Netanyahu or Donald Trump or Larry Ellison or that guy Diamond, who I have JP Diamond or whatever his damn name is. I've seen a lot of things. All these people who just are on the other side of a class. I don't know how that includes them. because I think they are fighting for a different world than I am. And I feel like we'll be defending ourselves against them in the end. But I'm not going to try to have it answer that question. I'll just say that they would say that when I hear Kenny talking about love and rationality, I think those things are divided in our lives and under capitalism, and that in the same way that almost like theory and practice are divided, and mental and manual labor are divided. Like there does seem to be, we're going to have to experience an integration process, and the benefits that that video had is, I believe that integration process happens in real physical contact, and happens in real struggle together to do something. We can say they're fighting against something, they are, but they're also struggling to do something and have a world where the people who work to bring power into people's lives are free to decide how that work will be done, and then they can work in community with those who support that work in other work that's done, like in some sort of interconnection. Like we would call that socialism or communism if it was ever to be brought to full fruition. And I believe there's a class of people who not just want to exploit, but are going to use division as a tool for maintaining that exploitation over all those common oppressed classes and groups and things like that. So it just tells me that we have a lot of experience to catch up on in terms of knowing how to integrate love and rationality. But I do think I think I want to be very cautious in the future, more cautious than I have been in the past, for following and distinguishing between an opponent from above versus a person who I disagree with within my own class, who is listened to opponent just like I am. I'm getting a feed from them, but I have attempted to insulate myself from them as best I can. But like, just understand the difference between a person who's trying to lie to me to control me versus a person who disagrees with me, but who are also just as lost, and I need them just as much as they need me. I don't think I need Bill Gates. And I don't mean to say that name as but I don't think I need those people up there. I don't know what to do with love, which ultimately would say that there's a way of resolving like that class difference in a way that doesn't require revolution. And the rationality of a book like this, which we're reading tomorrow, Wage, Labor, and Capital, the rationality of this for me does explain to me a world I live in, and why it's operating particularly, why I'm in World War III, why I knew they weren't going to reach an agreement with Ukraine, why I think war is going to grow and grow and grow. The rationality of that helps me know what kind of ideas are working against me. But I do believe Kenny's right. There's some kind of limit there that has to be answered by some other experience. And I think that experience is more articulated in the video you're showing, Eduardo. And none of us have, I haven't had that kind of experience in my lifetime. Like that kind of experience of a comradeship that's built out of actually fighting together with people in some sort of common thing against something that's coming in that's unfair and unjust. Just haven't had that. So I guess those are the thoughts I have.
I think you said what I was trying to say very well when you said we need practice understanding how the love and the rationality actually function together. And I had a strong feeling just then watching that clip, and then it's what a great connection, Eduardo. Thank you for that, because they were sticking up for themselves. Partially, what I'm feeling such a lack of now, feeling such despair around, is that even the people who seem the hardest hit don't even have a vision that they could stand up for themselves. And it's almost like by even my little union struggle at my job, it gives an opportunity for people to actually come together and discuss how the world might be different. Without that struggle, there's no real basis on which to actually actively demonstrate that love or that rationality. So like if people are not rising up or trying to figure out how to fight back, if people are not sticking up for themselves, then it's very difficult, or maybe it's impossible, for there to be a union of those two things of love and rationality. And I just, it's like right now, the destruction of like left organization, to me, has manifested in a state where people do not really think that any kind of struggle is fruitful. They don't imagine standing up for themselves in an organized way, except for certain places at certain times. And I guess I'm talking about the people around me. And it's so frustrating because they also talk about these big ideas and how things should be changed, but like we're being attacked right now, and none of you are actually, everybody's just putting their heads down and obeying because they're afraid. So there's no opportunity for us to come together in solidarity because everyone's just accepting it. And so what if, in a way, that like spiritual awakening part is also the fact that, it does have to sort of spread and become a broad movement where people are inspired to stand up for themselves. To me, the greatest moments of joy have to do with when people have been, collectively disobeying, even just recently, just having a simple thing like students walk out and we had, a little rally. It's like, thank goodness somebody is actually sticking up for themselves. So like the idea of love is an abstraction. In practice, it's when we relate and connect. And in practice, it also requires common needs, common interests. So it's hard to find that inspiration and love when there's no connection and the state is just dictating the terms of our existence and people are not standing up for themselves.
And we're disconnected from one another in boxes.
Right. Disconnected from one another in boxes as defined by the ruling class and the state itself.
But I also mean like the internet.
Right. Yes. The world that has been constructed for us by capitalism, including like in our separate cars.
Yep.
Like the way that our world became designed around into cars is it could have also been a very conscious strategy for social control, just like let's push single family homes and everybody's fighting over their own lawn. We're all isolated in our little cars, and they constructed this world quite consciously because it also flushed with making more profit. Because when each unit is spread apart, a little smaller piece of something has much more surface area, meaning like an individual person has to buy much, much more than, groups of people.
Yep.
So how do we even think of ourselves as being part of groups of people? There's an interesting inquiry I have now about the use of that word communities. I have big questions about like how that arose and what it means. It means different things when different people say communities.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it's interesting looking at that inspiring thing from the 80s, which was when we had already been through a big decline. And I feel like that kind of thing was some of the last vestiges of like class conscious struggle that emerged, that was still happening. I mean, I don't really know that that's true, but that was right before, the early 90s, when everything was just, crushed. And yet we know that thing of people connecting and sticking up for each other can absolutely happen, but it cannot happen unless unless people actually stick up for themselves.
I don't know, just from what Michael was saying, I I don't know, I just kept thinking that it all started with fences, and it's just now they're digital, and they're getting more, like you said, minute, and like breaking things down more precisely. And yeah, I mean, I think we're so many generations into living in that setup, right? Like fences, and like, I don't know. I don't have answers. I think you're bringing up a good point, Michael. That what does community mean? Like, right? Like, does it mean that you live in a gated community? I mean, that's a fucking community, right? Like, there's plenty of those in Central America where everyone else is dying outside. The people inside are living well, and
And in what senses are all the people who are gay connected as a community?
Wait until he comes back on. Speaking about being gay, I mean, here in Mexico City, if you're gay, you're supposed to be one of the most, richest kind of upper class, Polanco, Roma, these neighborhoods that you're supposed to do these cafes and have brunch and your shoes and it's like, I don't relate to those gay people at all. I relate to my neighbors. I remember being with my closest friend's house and just realizing just this view that I had, I guess, of SF, like white people in SF. White people in SF are very rich because this is SF. There are hardly any children in SF. And then we were staying in this trailer park camp, and we would tent out in the back. And the fight between her boyfriend and the kids crying and the lack of clothes, and then she asking me for money, and there's all these fights, and there's a bunch of they didn't talk like hillbillies, but I just saw poverty everywhere, and everyone around me was white. And I thought to myself, I was 17, 18 years old. That was for the first time I realized, shit, this country has more poor people than I thought, and they're white. In my head, I was thinking, shoot, they're white and they're poor, and this beautiful blonde sister of his with all these babies, and she'd have to go pick up her welfare check, and we would take care of her kids. And I would always tell my friend, I said, what's up with your family? Why don't they have it together? What's going on? And then traveling through the USA, I just realized that this isn't just a single case. This is happening all over America, So I realized that there is a silence majority, and that unites us. And Black folk in ghettos, or white folk in trailer parking lots, or Latinos in barrios. And I just think that if we just bring down those barriers, if we just saw each other for what we are, we are same. We're fighting against the same thing. And just like those miners with LGBT folk fighting against police oppression. I mean, actual footage I'll share where they're fighting against police, and there's abhorrent police brutality against these miners and against the LGBT. And we're seeing gay men in defense of these older coal miners, putting their lives on the line. That to me is so, heartening. So I just think that is an example of how genuine friendships are formed. And I just think, it just makes me think about minors entering gay bars for the first time in their life, speaking up and saying thank you. Conservative folk that never have entered a gay bar in their life, and doing that for the first time, and thanking them for protecting their families, protecting their community, protecting their town. People who were brutally hit and were in hospital. It's so heartwarming to think that there can be alliances like that. So, would it be difficult for me to see my alliance with a Trump supporter? Of course it is. I think back to my experiences, though, we're on the same front about this. Let's direct our energies against the capitalist state together, and this misplaced anger, direct it right.
Just a real quick comment that, again, the way I understand history is that people who bring different fights together, right? Like, they're the most dangerous and they have to go. Like, they cannot be argued against. That's what the state, the powerful believe, right? Like, they know it. They have to get rid of people who threaten to bring people together.
Like Fred Hampton.
Yeah, or that's how I read MLK's death, Malcolm X's death, when they were switching to a more like all-encompassing fight. These orators, they had to go because too much trouble ahead.
Yeah. Michael, do you have any last thoughts? Because I'm going to try to wrap up.
No, I said enough.
Well, I guess I'll just say thanks to you all for engaging me in this sort of discussion about my uncle. I appreciate Aaron Leonard for writing that book and for doing that interview and bringing this to our attention. I appreciate my uncle for, like his last, what is it? Black and White Men Together, right? That was the group that he was part of near the end of his life, which is a group of gay men trying to overcome the divisions between blacks and whites in the gay community. But he was also conscious of the kind of thing Eduardo's talking about, being more involved in class struggles and things like that. And I think, and so I'm grateful for him for, again, reminding me that the most important thing that I can do as a revolutionary is to try to unite different people. And it's hard when we disagree, or it's hard when we might think the fights are different. But that will be a very important part of doing this. And like you said, Kenny, the people who are the most threatening are the ones who have been unifiers. And that's just really important to remember. And I think the CP and the Maoist groups and the Trotskyist groups who would split, both lost their way. And I really do agree with Michael. That's been the intervention of the state into those groups as well. It's to just help boost, amp up that signal that creates divisions.
The FBI and the government will look for ways to separate us.
Yep.
I appreciate your uncle.
Yeah.
I wanted to say that too, because you said it, that he influenced you, and you've made a big part of my life, like my understanding of the world, without telling me. But you've thank you for also being around and continuing that journey of your uncle that your uncle started or continued in your family.
Thank you.
All right. Well, let's get this episode concluded. That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. Post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode, or on our blog at whatsleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on Spotify, iTunes, Podcast, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Promote, Telegram. And you can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes wherever you found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback, especially about this episode, I really liked it, and thank you, Andy, for bringing it up. And if folks want to give us feedback about it, we could actually read some of the comments maybe about something you've heard. You can contact Andy, or you can suggest something for us to cover. Contact us through our blog. I'm Eduardo Barca with my co-host Kenny, Michael, Andy. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being a part of this team. Thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for always sticking together. And we'll have another episode next week. Thank you all for listening, as well as our fifth co-host. Ciao.